When we think of serial killers, certain names invariably come to mind. They are the boogeymen of our modern age. Their stories told and retold in documentaries and films. They become almost mythical. But what about the others? The ones who operated in the shadows, whose crimes were just as brutal yet whose names have been largely forgotten. Killers who challenged our understanding of evil, not for brilliance or charm, but for being unremarkable, hiding monstrosities behind normalcy, or within communities society ignored. This isn't about famous monsters, it's about those who slipped through the cracks. We will explore men who committed dozens, sometimes even hundreds of horrific acts, yet never achieved notoriety, because victims were deemed unimportant, the homeless, the marginalized, the forgotten. We will journey to the desolate backwoods of South Carolina, to the crowded, indifferent streets of Detroit, and back to a medieval French castle. Each story shows a different face of evil, all connected by a common thread: disconnection from humanity, a capacity for violence that's hard to comprehend. They didn't seek fame. Many sought the opposite. They wanted to erase their victims, to make them disappear as if they never existed. A chilling reminder, the greatest horrors often go unnoticed. By examining these cases, we begin to see systemic failures. How communities were shattered, how justice was selective, how predators blend in when no one watches. The silence around these killers is unsettling. It forces a question: how many others move through the world unnoticed? Their stories waiting to be unearthed from shallow graves. This is an exploration of that silence and the terror it conceals. In 1928, inside the stone walls of Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary, a man named Carl Panzram was given a pencil and paper by a curious guard. What he wrote over the following weeks was not a plea for redemption, but a cold, detailed manifesto of a life dedicated to hatred. Born in 1891 in rural Minnesota, Panzram's childhood was a brutal introduction to the world. After his father abandoned the family, he was sent to a reform school at a young age, a place he later described as a crucible of cruelty, where he was taught how to lie, how to hate, and how to hurt. This experience extinguished any belief he had in humanity. Panzram's early adulthood was spent as a drifter, crisscrossing the country by hopping trains. He committed countless burglaries, arsons, and assaults. But unlike many criminals who stole to survive, Panzram acted out of a nihilistic rage against society. He enjoyed the act of destruction itself. In one of his most audacious crimes, he broke into the home of former United States President William Howard Taft, stealing valuables and a pistol. His crimes escalated dramatically when he used the funds from the Taft burglary to purchase a yacht. This boat, cruising along the East Coast, became a floating abattoir. Panzram would lure sailors, drifters aboard with promises of work, shelter, only for them to vanish into the Atlantic Ocean. He later claimed to have killed multiple men on that yacht, their disappearances never connected to him at the time. Panzram did not become famous like other serial killers because he had no pattern, kept no trophies, and targeted people who were unlikely to be missed. He was a ghost, leaving a trail of chaos that was too sporadic and widespread for authorities to piece together. His written confession, which he titled Panzram, A Journal of a Murderer, is one of the most unfiltered documents in the history of criminology. In it, he claimed to have committed 21 murders and thousands of other crimes. "I hate the whole damn human race," he wrote. "I don't believe in man, God, nor the devil." He saw his life not as a series of mistakes, but as a logical response to the cruelty he had experienced. He was not insane, he was chillingly self-aware, a man who had made a conscious choice to become a monster because, in his eyes, the world had made him one first. Carl Panzram's reign of terror was not confined to the United States. He was a truly international predator, a specter of violence who drifted through Europe, Africa, South America. In Angola, while working as a labor overseer, he claimed to have hired 6 local men for a job. He led them into the remote bush. He murdered them all simply to see if he could get away with it. In a time and place where the lives of local laborers were seldom documented, his crimes went entirely unnoticed by any formal authority. What makes Panzram's story so disturbing is his complete lack of a conventional motive. He didn't kill for lust, he didn't kill for financial gain, he didn't kill for the thrill of the chase, he killed out of a deep philosophical hatred for humanity. He sexually assaulted countless men, using violence as a tool to exert power and to replicate the very abuses that had shaped him. He saw no difference between theft, arson, sexual assault, murder. To him, it was all the same currency of pain. This lack of a clear signature made him nearly impossible to profile or track. He was arrested dozens of times under a multitude of aliases. He frequently escaped, He was a ghost in the system, his true identity and the full scale of his crimes remaining a mystery for decades. He did not crave the spotlight. Fame was irrelevant to him. Ultimately, Panzram was caught for a simple burglary in 1928. His final act of violence was murdering a prison staff member, which led to his death sentence. When asked if he had any last words, he famously retorted, "Hurry it up, you Hoosier bastard! I could kill a dozen men while you're fooling around." He died as he lived, defiant, unrepentant, and utterly alone. His story remains a brutal, nihilistic footnote in the history of crime. In the sweltering backwoods of South Carolina, a different kind of monster was born. Donald Henry Gaskins, known as Pee-wee due to his small stature, was cast into a world of neglect and abuse from his first breath in 1933. Tossed aside by his family, he grew up feral and mean, learning early that survival meant being the one who inflicted pain, not the one who received it. His childhood was a litany of horrors: starvation, beatings, profound emotional abandonment. By his teenage years, he had already graduated to serious crimes, a path that led him to reform school, where he endured further brutalization that solidified his vow to never be a victim again. Upon his release, Gaskins presented a deceptively calm exterior to the world. He was a small, soft-spoken man with a slow southern drawl that could sound almost friendly. But beneath that veneer was a predator of terrifying prolificacy. He began what he called his coastal kills, preying on hitchhikers, preying on drifters along the highways of the Carolinas. These victims were chosen specifically because he believed no one would miss them. He would offer a ride, a beer, a moment of kindness before his true nature revealed itself in a storm of violence. The methods varied, but the outcome was always the same: another life extinguished and buried in a shallow, forgotten grave. Gaskins didn't become a household name like other serial killers because his activities were confined to a rural, isolated part of the country, and his victims were from the fringes of society. For years, law enforcement in different counties failed to connect the string of disappearances. There was no media frenzy, no dedicated task force. Gaskins operated with impunity in a world that wasn't looking for him. He claimed to have killed between 80 and 90 people, a staggering number that, if true, would make him one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. He wasn't building a legacy, he was simply feeding an insatiable urge. His cruelty was not limited to strangers. In a chilling escalation, Gaskins began murdering people he knew, including his own niece and her friend, because he disapproved of their behavior. This demonstrated a complete void of empathy. Family, friendship, and loyalty were meaningless concepts to him. He killed a pregnant woman to silence her, and murdered a 13-year-old boy who had witnessed another crime. To Pee-wee Gaskins, human lives were disposable, and his corner of South Carolina was a private cemetery where he could bury his secrets, one body at a time, far from the prying eyes of the world. For years, Donald Gaskins moved like a phantom through the swamps, back roads of the South, his crimes just piling up in the shadows. He was so unremarkable, so good at blending into his rural community that he basically stayed invisible to law enforcement. A string of missing persons reports in scattered, under-resourced counties just wasn't enough to raise any real alarm. Gaskins was methodical in his disposal of bodies. The downfall didn't come from brilliant detective work, it came when he killed someone people actually cared about. In 1975, a man who had been an accomplice cracked under pressure and led police to a makeshift graveyard on Gaskins' property. The scene was a straight-up horror show. Shallow graves littered the land, with bones and decomposing remains testifying to years of silent slaughter. When arrested, Gaskins was calm, almost casual. He confessed to numerous murders, referring to them not as killings but as "my things," like he was just cleaning out a barn or something. Sentenced to death, Gaskins' sentence was commuted to life in prison. But a cage couldn't contain his malevolence. Behind bars, he cultivated a reputation as the Redneck Manson. His most infamous act came when he was hired by a man on the outside to kill a fellow inmate, Rudolph Tyner. Gaskins came up with a sinister plan, building a makeshift bomb disguised as a walkie-talkie. He convinced Tyner to hold the device to his ear for a secret communication, then detonated it, killing Tyner instantly in his cell. This final audacious murder from behind bars sealed his fate. Gaskins was once again sentenced to death, and this time there would be no reprieve. He was executed in 1991. In the 1970s and early 80s, women in Michigan and Texas were being murdered with terrifying randomness. Their deaths were brutal and seemed so disconnected: strangulation, stabbing, drowning, bludgeoning. Police in different jurisdictions saw only isolated tragedies, not the work of a single elusive predator. That predator was Carl Eugene Watts, a man whose quiet demeanor and unremarkable appearance allowed him to become one of history's most prolific yet least-known serial killers. His reign of terror was defined not by a signature but by the lack of one, making him an almost perfect phantom. Born in Texas in 1953, Watts's early life was marked by a bout of meningitis that some believe altered his personality, leaving him cold and detached. As a teenager, he began having violent fantasies about killing women, which, disturbingly, he did not hide. At 15, he attacked his first victim, and a psychiatric evaluation chillingly warned of his high potential for future violence. Yet, he was released after only a few months. He slipped back into society, a quiet man who played football and held down jobs. Watts did not kill for reasons that criminologists typically identify. He didn't seem to derive sexual gratification from the act, nor did he seek power or fame. In his twisted mind, he believed he was cleansing the world of women he perceived as having evil eyes. This vague and nonsensical motive meant that any woman could become a target at any time. He acted on impulse, killing quickly and efficiently before disappearing back into the fabric of everyday life. He moved to Detroit in 1974, and the murder rate of young women spiked. He later moved to Houston, where the pattern repeated, earning him the nickname the Sunday Morning Slasher. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of violence that struck without warning and left no discernible path. Carl Eugene Watts's killing spree finally came to an end not through a major breakthrough but through a stroke of luck and the courage of a survivor. In the late 1960s and early 70s, a different kind of predator haunted the streets of Los Angeles, far from the glitz of Hollywood. In the desolate alleys of Skid Row, a place already synonymous with despair, homeless men were being found murdered, their throats cut with surgical precision. The killer, dubbed the Skid Row Slasher, was Vaughn Greenwood. His story is a stark reminder that some serial killers thrive not by being clever, but by choosing victims that society has already deemed invisible. The men he killed were drifters and alcoholics, individuals whose disappearance would barely register as a blip. Greenwood's early life was a familiar tale of neglect. Abandoned by his parents, he drifted through the foster care system, never forming attachments and accumulating a record of petty crimes. He was a ghost long before he started killing. His first known victim was found in 1964, but the killings were sporadic, with a long gap while Greenwood was imprisoned for an unrelated assault. When he was released in the early 1970s, the murders resumed with terrifying frequency. In a span of just a few months, 11 men were killed. The crime scenes were bizarre and ritualistic. Greenwood would often pose his victims' bodies and leave behind strange symbols, sometimes drawing them in blood. In some cases, he left a cup filled with the victim's blood near the body. This led to initial speculation of cult activity, further obscuring the fact that this was the work of a lone, deeply disturbed individual. He saw himself not as a murderer, but as a purifier, cleansing the streets of those he deemed unworthy. Greenwood's reign of terror ended when he made a mistake. He attacked a man who managed to fight back and escape. The survivor, William Graham, provided a description and recalled his attacker muttering about purifying the street. A letter dropped during the struggle led police to Greenwood's name. They found him living in an abandoned church, surrounded by a makeshift altar and evidence linking him to the murders. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, dying in obscurity in 2020. His case highlights a grim truth. For decades, a man could hunt human beings in a major American city simply because his victims were men nobody was looking for. The stories of Carl Panzram, Donald Gaskins, Carl Eugene Watts, Vaughn Greenwood are unsettling not just for their brutality, but for their relative obscurity. These men were not charismatic manipulators or criminal masterminds. They were blunt instruments of violence, their motives often as murky and chaotic as their crimes. They lack the clean, sensational narrative modern true crime often demands. There are no thrilling cat-and-mouse games, only a grim, grinding reality of systemic failure and human indifference. These killers operated in the blind spots of society. They preyed on the marginalized, the homeless, the drifters, the sex workers, people whose lives were considered disposable by many. The lack of public outcry or intense media coverage gave these predators time. They were allowed to kill again and again because the world was not watching. Their obscurity reflects the value society placed on their victims. It forces us to confront our own biases about whose life matters. The nature of their violence was often too raw and nihilistic for popular consumption. Panzram's philosophical hatred, Gaskin's casual cruelty, Watts's sheer randomness, none make for compelling television. These are not stories of redemption or psychological intrigue. They are bleak, devoid of satisfying explanation. It's easier to focus on a charming Ted Bundy than to confront a Vaughn Greenwood, nurtured in places society would rather forget. Remembering these stories is crucial. They are indictments of the systems that failed to stop them. They teach us that evil often flourishes in quiet neglect. By unearthing buried histories, we honor victims forgotten twice. Their lives and deaths are a permanent reminder that the most dangerous monsters hide in plain sight, in dark corners we've chosen to ignore.